hour, and I know in Moscow that means we'll probably still have folks roll in for the next 5 to 8 minutes, which is fine. But we'll go ahead and get started. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Yes, Jim? Oh, are you?
I just want to say we have a member of the Pullman League here, Larry.
Oh, lovely.
Came to join us. So welcome.
All the way from another state.
All
Thank
the
you
way
for
from-
being here.
I didn't even check my passport.
Well, that's wonderful, and I see lots of friendly, familiar faces in the crowd and a few new faces, so that's really exciting. But I will introduce our speaker today, because it's me. So my name is Dulcie Kirsten-Clark, and I am on the board for the Moscow League of Women Voters, and I am the program committee chairwoman. So it's really my delight to work with some really thoughtful folks to have a calendar of programs set up for the rest of our semester, which Mary was kindly handing out at the door. So I hope that you'll take that home and put it on your refrigerator and make plans to join us for some of our other sessions planned for this semester. And I have one that I'm going to point out special to you at the end of today's presentation, but it's a really diverse calendar, which I'm very excited about. I am the inaugural program. I figured it was only fair to put an insider up against the Chamber of Commerce candidate forum. But look at all you fine folks here. So thank you for choosing this venue. And of course, we will have our own candidate forum on October 23rd. Moscow League will host that in the great room of the 1912.
And we didn't even have snacks.
And we didn't, yeah.
So there.
So you all are here on your own volition. It wasn't even tempted by cookies, and I appreciate that. Today I'm going to talk to you about rural America, then and now, how persistent change has shaped our communities. As many of you will know, we do have a traveling Smithsonian exhibit that is on display downtown at the Chamber of Commerce office. It's called Crossroads Change in Rural America. And that really spawned my interest in studying this topic over the last several months. That project is hosted by a variety of organizations. As I said, it's a Smithsonian curated exhibit. It's part of their Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service. It is brought to our great state of Idaho by the Idaho Humanities Council that travels it to 6 communities throughout Idaho. We are the first, we're the very first host of Crossroads here in the state. And we actually had a representative from the Smithsonian with us for several days last month as we installed the exhibit, and that was really great, and she was very impressed by Moscow. I think, we have a lot to offer if you're used to the hustle and bustle of Washington, D.C. Of course, my organization, the Lake County Historical Society, did a lot of the legwork, and we couldn't have done it without the Moscow Chamber of Commerce, which is offering their space to us for 6 weeks. So Crossroads Change in Rural America focuses on how rural America as a whole has changed over the last 100 years. I like to consider why exhibitions are titled the way they are when I visit a museum. I'm one of the worst people to visit a museum with because I'm very critical and I look at things and I wonder why they chose the font they chose or why they chose the wording they did. But I think it's really enlightening. It's kind of like when you pick up a book and you consider why did they title the book in the way that they did, and sometimes it's not evident to you until you reach the end. So Crossroads Change in Rural America the exhibit opens with these words, quote, "Americans come together at the crossroads. They invest in places and build their futures where their paths cross. Small towns became centers of commerce, trade, local politics, and culture, and for some, crossroads affirmed a new life in a new place. And for others, the crossroads meant hard work and hard times. Our rural communities are now at a new intersection of paths, where the past and the future are intersecting, and we have to decide which path we want to pursue." I think that these statistics are useful in a lot of ways to frame the conversation we're going to have today. But if you think about it, America 120-ish years ago in 1900, 40% of Americans lived in rural areas. And the U.S. Census Bureau considers rural to be any community of 2,500 people or less. That is just one definition among many. If you were to look at the USDA's definition of rural, it's a little bit different. And I think many of us would argue that if it's dichotomous and there is rural or urban, are we urban in Moscow? 2,500 people is not that many. Is St. Mary's urban? So I think that rural and urban is probably not a very fine-tuned way to think about our country, how it breaks down. But 110 years after that initial statistic in 2010, less than 18% of our total population lives in rural areas. The important thing to remember about those statistics is while the percentage of our population has gone down by more than 20% in rural areas, the number has stayed relatively the same. 60 million people still live in rural areas. It's just that where America is seeing growth is in urban metropolitan areas. Only 3.5% of America's total land mass is considered urban, where cities are, where large communities are. And so the vast majority of the geographic mass of America is in fact rural. And certainly in the West, there may be no place more evident than here. So Americans have relied on rural crossroads for generations. These are places where people gather to exchange goods, services, and culture, as well as to engage in political and community discussions, which are an important part of our national character. And I think perhaps a less glamorous way to look at it, maybe even a less generous way to look at it, is that Americans rely on extraction from rural places. We wouldn't have food to eat in our country, we wouldn't really have fuel for our homes or our vehicles if it weren't for places in rural America. That's where these products come from. So for food and fuel and fiber and so much more, we rely on rural America. And that has been the case essentially since our founding. Are any of you familiar with the term Jeffersonian democracy? Do you remember this from your American civics class a few years ago? Jeffersonian democracy was this concept that the yeoman farmer was the linchpin of American identity, that farmers were self-reliant, they were productive, they were hardworking, and those were the sorts of people that should be building America up. And so Jefferson really believed in the agrarian complex within the United States. And so certainly our concept of the American dream has been shaped by that. Being able to own your own land is part of the American dream. Having a self-contained Main Street is part of the American dream. So from the very beginning, we have really believed that rural places are the best embodiment of American values. So there's lots of ways that we could characterize rural. In fact, just creating a definition of rural is really problematic. And if you've had a chance to visit the exhibit, you'll probably notice this, that there's lots of ways that you can conceive of it. But I'd like to hear from you all what you think of when you think of rural America. What are the words that come to your mind?
Less traffic.
Less traffic, certainly.
But longer distances sometimes to travel.
So less traffic, but we don't have the resources right here sometimes. Yeah.
Agricultural.
Agriculture is huge, especially in our part of the world.
Friendly.
Yeah. We like to be. We sure try. Others?
Nice views
Okay.
that you don't see in big cities with skyscrapers. You don't always see the sky there.
Yeah, so there's the things that we see day to day. They're the things that we feel. We feel fresh air. We don't feel enclosed in spaces. There are the people that we share our communities with. And this is just a little word cloud that I Googled and it came up, and there's all sorts of things. Cattle, cows, There's a little component within the exhibit down at the chamber that has a Fisher-Price playset in it that has farm animals. And we talk to children when they visit how special it is that we live in a place where you can actually see real cows and pigs and chickens, because there are a lot of children that grow up and that's their closest relationship to farm animals, or the toys that they have in their toy chest. So as a child who grew up on a farm, I guess it was a privilege until it came time for chores. Then maybe it was less of a privilege. Yeah.
I heard back here, I don't know who said it, but white. I think there's less diversity for sure.
And I think that is certainly a characteristic of rural places that is one of the changes that we're experiencing. I also believe, and I gave this presentation, actually, I gave a different presentation this past weekend about archives and how archives are formed, and so much of what we know about our history is based on the archival material that's available to us, and archives tend to reflect those people in power. So I would argue that rural America has always been diverse. It's just that the diversity has not been expressed in the same way, and that it's not always been as evident. But there are a lot of accounts in our oral history collection of people who arrived in Lake Todd County that did not speak English. They were white, but they didn't speak English. And so the diversity takes different forms over time. But I don't disagree with you that we have a diversity problem. It's at least the perception of it, certainly. And I've got some information about that a little bit later on. Rural America, as I said, is part of the American identity, and it's been celebrated by artists of all genres for as long as America has been a country. If you think of some very famous representations like American Gothic, this is a very famous painting. This painting right here is really a symbol of westward expansion, American progress right there. If you think about this really beautiful quilt top, I'm not sure of the artist there, but it's celebrated in folk art, it's celebrated in high art. Think of Loretta Lynn's Coal Miner's Daughter. That's maybe a part of rural America we don't think of as naturally in farming country, but certainly Appalachia has a proud rural American heritage. And then, I don't know, maybe you have grandchildren, I never listened to the song in full, but this summer's hottest single was a song called Old Town Road. It was on the top of the music charts for weeks and weeks. And it was a song by a rapper and a collaboration with Billy Ray Cyrus, who you might remember. And it was the #1 song on pop charts for weeks and weeks. And it was this gentleman rapping about going out to the Old Town Road to ride his horse. So this concept of rural America is still very attractive, even in the 21st century. Poor Jenny, all of these things. This room here, they all have some problems. It's coming, but just because we've also celebrated rural America doesn't mean that there haven't been artists who've been critical of it as well. So if we consider that there are also some, the artists have also rightfully critiqued rural America. Topics like the dispossession of land experienced by American Indians, the horrific enslavement of Africans and their descendants, the exploitation of migrant laborers, and the abuses of extractive industries. And all of those problems, all of those legacies of rural America have fostered stereotypes of the country bumpkin, a righteous prohibitionist, of course that harkens back to Prohibition era, and or the xenophobic Klans member. So I really want you to see these images, so I'm going to just unplug this and see if it
I
helps.
think you need one of the HDMI.
Jenny said the HDMI wasn't working.
Oh.